Hi there, and welcome to the Daily Gardener. And thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's February 13th. Today, we celebrate the botanist who sailed with Captain James Cook on the Endeavour, and the man regarded as the father of North American mycology. We'll learn about the man who patented the first practical lawnmower 198 years ago today. And today's Unearthed Words feature a poet and writer who used the names Flora or Florilla as her pseudonyms. We grow that garden library with a book about one man's adventures with bumblebees. And I'll talk about a flexible and tough garden item that you can buy. It'll help you plant your seedlings, and it's reusable to boot. And then we'll wrap things up with the story of a woman who knew the botanical world of Nantucket like the back of her hand. But first, let's catch up on a few recent events. Here's today's curated articles. First up is a post from the North Carolina Botanical Garden. They've selected their 2020 Wildflower of the Year. It's marsh pink, or Sabbatia angularis. The Botanical Garden introduces it this way. Marsh pink is a stunning biennial in the gentian family. It's also known as rose gentian, rose pink, or bitter bloom. It's native to the eastern and southern United States, where it can be found growing in low, moist edges of open woods, as well as prairies, roadsides, meadows, and marshes. So keep all of that in mind if you're going to plant this. I'd be looking for someplace a little wetter in the garden. A few other things that they mention are that it grows best in moist soil, but also in full to partial sun. So don't put it in the shade. And then they mention two other very interesting things about this plant. First, because it's biennial, you're very rarely going to find it in a nursery. And then second of all, it seems to completely disappear in years of drought. So if we end up having a couple of dry years, you might think you've lost your marsh pink. But then when moisture returns, sometimes you'll get it back. Anyway, there you have it, the 2020 Wildflower of the Year, as selected by the North Carolina Botanical Garden, marsh pink. If you'd like to read their full blog post about this wildflower, just search for the word Carolina, and this post will pop up. Then next up was a post that was shared by House and Garden. This was actually a post from their archives. They reshared an article in which Vita Sackville-West wrote about the creation of her garden at Sissinghurst. Vita's garden was something she made from scratch together with her husband, Harold Nicholson. And even though this article was posted in 1950, there is so much good information and inspiration that we can take from Vita as she's talking about renovating and designing the garden at Sissinghurst. I thought I'd share a few excerpts from this excellent post with you. And then if you're inspired and you want to read the full article, you can do so later when you get a chance. Now, if you're renovating or starting a garden from scratch, I think you'll be particularly inspired by what Vita wrote. Here's where she's talking about how run down Sissinghurst was when she and Harold first acquired the property. Here's what she said. The place had been on the market for 3 years since the death of the last farmer owner. Brambles grew in wild profusion. Bindweed wreathed its way into every support. Ground elder made a green carpet. Docks and nettles flourished. Couch grass sprouted. Half the fruit trees in the orchard were dead. The ones that remained alive were growing in the coarsest grass. The moat was silted up and so invaded by reeds and bulrushes that the water was almost invisible. Paths there were none, save of trodden mud. It had its charm. Another excerpt that I wanted to share with you was basically Vita's first things first. What did she tackle first? Which is so often the question that gardeners ask when confronted with a new space. It really doesn't matter if the space is large or small. Often, the first big hurdle is knowing where to start. Here's what Vita wrote. The most urgent thing to do was to plant hedges. We were extravagant over this and planted yew and have never regretted it. Everybody told us it took at least a century to make a good yew hedge. But the photographs will, I think, disprove this. The hedge is now only 17 years old, a mere adolescent. And at the end, where the ground slopes, and it has been allowed to grow up in order to maintain the top level, it is 16 feet high. At the end of all this is the herb garden, which always seems to allure visitors, no doubt because it is a secret, sentimental little place. Old world charm is the phrase I always expect to hear, and 9 times out of 10 I get it. But less romantically, the herb garden does supply very useful things to the kitchen. So there you go. You could take a lesson from Vita and start thinking about installing the bones of the garden first. In the case of Sissinghurst, the first thing was the hedges. But then also one of the big priorities was making the garden serve a purpose. And this is where getting started on the herb garden and the kitchen garden is very important. And of course, if you're going to have an herb garden or a kitchen garden, you want to place it as close to the house as you can. In my case, I have a deck that's right outside my kitchen door, and so my closest immediate kitchen garden is in containers on my deck. One of the best things I did was install drip irrigation. It starts below the deck, and then a line goes up and feeds all of the pots on the deck. And that entire kitchen garden is southern facing, which is perfect for my herbs. I share this with you in the event that you, like me, may not have a traditional garden space right outside your kitchen door. But that's okay because we can always get creative. There are always novel solutions to almost any garden problem. Sometimes you just need to be a little more creative or flexible or patient, which leads me to this final excerpt that I wanted to share with you from Vita. Here's what she said. One needs years of patience to make a garden. One needs deeply to love it in order to endure that patience. One needs optimism and foresight. One has to wait. One has to work hard oneself, sometimes as I had to work hard manually during war years, cutting all those hedges with shears in my spare time. I hated those hedges when I looked at my blistered hands, but at the same time, I still felt that it had been worthwhile planting them. They were the whole pattern and design and anatomy of the garden, and as such was worth any trouble I was willing to take. Well, believe me when I tell you that these are just a few of the excerpts from this fantastic post from 1950. 70 years later, and Vita is still inspiring us and teaching us. I hope you'll take the time to check out this post for yourself. If you're in the Facebook group for the show, just search for the word Vita, and this post will pop right up. Now, if you're not in the Facebook group, here's what you need to do. The next time you're in Facebook, just head on up to the search bar, type in the Daily Gardener Community, and then our group will pop up. There'll be a little button that you press. It'll say request to join. And then when you do that, it actually comes up on my phone. I see that. I look to make sure you're a real person, and then I admit you into the group. It's just that simple. Now, what do you get for being in the group? Well, first of all, you get to be part of this group that's just for listeners of the show. And then, second, you get access to all of the garden articles that I curate for the show. Each week, I search for good garden articles that are inspiring, posts that help to educate us about our favorite topic, gardening. This way, you don't have to take down any notes or track down links. It's all done for you in the Facebook group. And don't forget, belonging to the group is completely free and there's absolutely no spam. So, if you think about it, the next time you're on Facebook, just search for the Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. Today's the birthday of Joseph Banks, who was born on this day in 1743. Banks is best known for his study of Australian flora and fauna and his role as the botanist on board the Endeavour with Captain James Cook. When they landed in Australia, neither Cook nor Banks realized that the quartz reef where they planted the British flag contained gold. The area would remain untouched by Europeans for almost 2 more decades. Now, before they returned to England, Captain Cook was worried that the Endeavour wouldn't make it around the Cape of Good Hope. So, in a fateful decision, he brought the ship to Batavia, a Dutch colony. He wanted to stop there so that he could fortify the ship. Batavia was a dangerous place where malaria and dysentery were rampant. As a result of this stop, Cook lost a staggering 38 members of his crew. Banks and a fellow botanist named Daniel Solander managed to survive the stop in Batavia, although at one point they were both gravely ill. Even as they battled back from illness, the two botanists still went out to collect specimens. It's hard to keep a good botanist down. Now, gardeners owe a great debt of gratitude to Joseph Banks because when he returned to England after this voyage, it was Joseph Banks who advised King George III on the creation of a Royal Botanic Garden, also known as Kew, and that's spelled Kew. And Banks also did something else that was pretty spectacular. In 1778, he was serving as the president of the Linnaean Society, and that year, Carl Linnaeus died, and all of his belongings went up for sale. Banks knew just what to do. He acted quickly, buying everything of horticultural value on behalf of the Linnean Society. Linnaeus's notebooks and specimens were on a ship bound for England by the time the King of Sweden realized Linnaeus's legacy was no longer in the country. In a panic, he ordered a fast Navy ship to pursue the precious cargo, but the king was too late. The ship carrying all of Linnaeus's treasures safely reached England. Banks had secured the legacy of Linnaeus, which is why Carl Linnaeus's collection is in London at the Linnaeus Society's Burlington House. Banks helped spread Carl Linnaeus's ideas across the globe, which was easier for him to do based in London. The city was already the worldwide hub for science and botany. From a personal standpoint, Banks hired the Scottish botanist Robert Brown to be the botanical librarian at his house. The two became lifelong friends, so much so that when Banks died in 1820, he left his house, his collections, and his library to Brown, and he also gave him a sizable yearly allowance. And today is the birthday of the Moravian clergyman and botanist Louis David von Schweinitz, also known as the father of North American mycology, who was born on this day in 1780. Mycology is the study of fungi. Louis was born in Pennsylvania, and he was a descendant on his mother's side of Count Zinzendorf, the founder of the Moravian Church. Louis's hometown of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, was a Moravian settlement. When Louis was 7 years old, he was placed in a Moravian boarding school called Nazareth Hall. One of Louis's earliest memories was visiting Nazareth Hall before attending there. He passed by one of the classrooms and he saw a specimen of Lichen digitatus sitting on a table, and he went to inspect it. It was Louis's first experience with botany, and it would become his favorite subject. After completing his education, Louis moved to Niesky, Germany with his family. He was 18 years old. In Germany, Louis became a pastor, he got married, and studied botany in his spare time. He even managed to help his professor put together a book featuring over 1,000 different types of fungi found in Niesky, Germany. Louis used his natural talent for drawing and painting to create the watercolors of the specimens that were featured in the book. Louis's work is all now digitized and available online, and it's absolutely stunning. You can check it out by using a link in today's show notes. It'll take you right to them. After many years in Germany, Louis and his wife moved back to the United States to lead a Moravian church. They settled in Salem, North Carolina, and although the church was his primary focus, throughout his life, Louis devoted all of his spare time to the study of fungi. Between 1812 and 1821, Louis collected in and around Salem, North Carolina. He was essentially replicating the job that he performed in Germany under the direction of his botany professor. In 1818, Louis published his work on the fungi of North Carolina. Then, 4 years later, in 1822, Louis published an even more comprehensive book featuring a staggering 3,000 species of fungi. In all, Louis single-handedly published over 1,200 new species of fungi. When Louis died, his enormous herbarium made its way to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. And here's a fun side note that pertains to Louis Schweinitz. In 1986, botanists discovered the rare sunflower that was named for Louis Schweinitz, the Schweinitz sunflower, or Helianthus schweinitzii, and it was growing near Rock Hill in South Carolina. The Schweinitz sunflower exists only in about a dozen little pockets around Rock Hill and Charlotte. Lewis himself initially discovered the Schweinitz sunflower in 1821. And it was on this day in 1822 that Jeremiah Bailey of Chester County, PA, patented the first practical lawnmower. It had two wheels and was pulled by a horse. And a person could mow up to 10 acres a day with Bailey's machine. After locals trialed his mower, they reported, "We consider it as one of the most complete and useful machines for agricultural uses hitherto invented." The first genuinely successful lawnmower would be patented 10 years later by Obed Husey of Maryland. In unearthed words, today is the birthday of the heartfelt American poet and writer known as Rutland's poet and Vermont's unofficial poet laureate, Julia Dorr. As a girl, her pseudonym was Flora or Florilla. The poet William Cullen Bryant once read one of her poems and wrote to tell her how much he loved the beauty of its imagery. And Ralph Waldo Emerson actually visited her and included one of her poems called Outgrown in his book called Parnassus. As you hear today's poems, imagine Julia Dorr writing in her little study next to her parlor. She had a window by her desk that overlooked her flower garden, which she called, quote, her refuge and her inspiration. This first poem's called The Honeybee. Roly-poly honeybee, humming in the clover, under you the tossing leaves and the blue sky over. Why are you so busy, pray, never still a minute, hovering now above a flower, now half buried in it? And now I'll give you a little sampling of some excerpts from some of her other poems. From Unanswered. And all the meadows, wide unrolled, were green and silver, green and gold, where buttercups and daisies spun their shining tissues in the sun. From Over the Wall. I know a spot where the wild vines creep and the coral moss cups grow, and where at the foot of the rocky steep the sweet blue violets blow. This verse is from A Red Rose. And the stately lilies stand fair in the silvery light, like saintly vessels, pale in prayer. Their pure breath sanctifies the air as its fragrance fills the night. From Without and Within. Often I linger where the roses pour exquisite odors from each glowing cup, or where the violet, brimmed with sweetness over, lifts its small chalice up. From Earth to Earth. Plant a white rose at my feet, or a lily fair and sweet, with the humble mignonette and the blue-eyed violet. From At the Gate. Around in silent grandeur stood the stately children of the wood, maple and elm and towering pine, mantled in folds of dark woodbine. This next piece is Julia Dorr's poem called Choosing. Meadow sweet or lily fair, which shall it be? Clematis or briar rose, blooming for me. Spicy pink or violet, with the dews of morning wet. Sweet peas or mignonette, which shall it be? Bluebells and yellow bells swinging in the air. Purple pansies golden pied, pink white daisies, starry eyed, gay nasturtiums deeply dyed, climbing everywhere. Life is so full, so sweet. How can I choose? If I gather this rose that I must lose, all are not for me to wear. I can only have my share. Thorns are hiding here and there. How can I choose? And here's a poem that Julia wrote called Homesick. She was often away from her garden, and she missed it. Oh, my garden, lying whitely in the moonlight and the dew, far across the leagues of distance flies my heart tonight to you. And I see your stately lilies in the tender radiance gleam with a dim, mysterious splendor like the angels of a dream. And finally, in honor of Valentine's Day tomorrow, I wanted to include her poem called An Answer to a Valentine. My true love sent me a valentine all on a winter's day, and suddenly the cold gray skies grew soft and warm as May. The snowflakes changed to apple blooms, a pink-white fluttering crowd, and on the swaying maple boughs the robins sang aloud. For moaning wintry winds, I heard the music sweet and low of morning glory trumpets through which the soft air blows. O love of mine, my Valentine, this is no wintry day, for love rules all the calendars, and love knows only May. Julia died just before her 88th birthday in 1913. Julia shares a tombstone with her husband, Seneca. The stone features a sweet little poem that Julia wrote called Beyond. I'll share it with you now. And for your understanding, a bark is a ship with 3 masts. Beyond the sunset's crimson bars, beyond the twilight and the stars, beyond the midnight and the dark, sail on, oh happy bark, into the dawn of that tomorrow, where hearts shall find the end of sorrow, and love shall find its own. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, A Sting in the Tail by Dave Goulson. The subtitle to this book is My Adventures with Bumblebees. Dave's book is fascinating, and it will change the way you think about bumblebees. When he was a little boy, Dave became obsessed with wildlife. Although he grew up with a menagerie of pets, bumblebees were his passion. I thought you'd enjoy hearing a few excerpts from Dave's book. Here's where he talks about the biology of the bumblebee. They have to eat almost continually to keep warm. A bumblebee with a full stomach is only ever about 40 minutes from starvation. If a bumblebee runs out of energy, she cannot fly. And if she cannot fly, she cannot get to flowers to get more food. So she's doomed. And then here's where Dave tells us what we can do to help the bumblebee. The answer for gardeners is a pretty simple one. Dave writes, the key to helping our rare bumblebee species to thrive is probably simply to add more flower patches to the landscape, making it a little easier for them to find food and to keep their nests well provisioned. And Dave is hopeful about the future of the bumblebee and about the impact that each of us can have on their survival. He writes, conserving bumblebees is something anyone can do. A single lavender bush on a patio or in a window box will attract and feed bumblebees, even in the heart of a city. And I love that Dave includes this fantastic quote from Andrew Downing, the 19th century American horticulturist. Downing said, "The music of the busy bee is drowsy, and it comforts me. But ah, 'tis quite another thing when that same bee concludes to sting." Dave's book came out in 2014. You can get a used copy of A Sting in the Tail by Dave Goulson and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for under $4. And here's today's great gift for a gardener. It's the eHabitus Silly Seedlings Silicone Seed Starting Tray for just $12.50. If you've never used a silicone seed starting tray, you are in for a treat. You should really give this one a try. When you purchase this one on Amazon, you get a package of two. Each cell is 2 inches by 2 inches by 2¼ inches deep, and each tray has 6 planting cells. When you get this little tray pack from Amazon, there's hardly any packaging. It's just got a little cardboard sleeve around it. The trays are crush proof since they're made of silicone. They're dishwasher safe, so they're super easy to clean. And as their website points out, they're infinitely reusable. Finally, if you're worried about removing your seedlings from the silicone, don't. Since the cells are so flexible, you can easily remove the seedling and at the same time keep the roots and the soil intact. Now, this product comes with a lifetime warranty. They're guaranteed to never crinkle, never crack, and since the silicone is a thick, heavy-duty material, the temperature of the soil is regulated much better with the silicone than plastic or peat. If you're looking for a fun new product to try this spring, the Silly Seedlings Silicone Seed Starting Tray is a great bet. You can get eHabitus's Silicone Seed Starting Tray Kit and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for $12.50. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of a student of Nantucket Flora, the botanist Maria Louise Owen, who was born on this day in 1825. When she was a little girl, Maria showed an interest in the plants growing around her home on Nantucket. The women in her family all loved botany, her mom, her sisters, and her aunt. It wasn't long before Maria showed an aptitude for it. She had a superior intellect, memory, and she had a scientific mind. After marrying a Harvard-educated doctor named Virilus Owen, the young couple settled in Springfield, Massachusetts. For more than 50 years, their Italianate home became a hub for scientists and academics. Maria loved to entertain, and she drew energy from connecting with the educated people in her area. One peer said that Maria was easily the most cultivated and best read woman of her time in Springfield. Maria served as the president of both the Springfield Women's Club and the Springfield Botanical Society for over a decade. A Renaissance woman, Maria taught botany, French, astronomy, and geography. And although she enjoyed teaching all of these subjects, she always said that for her, happiness could be found in the study of botany. In 1882, Maria contributed to a little Nantucket guidebook. Maria's part featured a listing of all the plants on the island of Nantucket. The project was a bit retrospective for Maria, since she was writing about the plants of her childhood and featuring specimens she'd collected as a young woman. Even after moving to Springfield, Maria still botanized in the area whenever she came back to Nantucket. And although she spent 5 decades of her adult life in Springfield, she always regarded Nantucket as her home. In 1888, Maria wrote her masterpiece, a comprehensive Flora of Nantucket, which featured almost 800 species and varieties. After her book, Maria made it a point to connect with new generations of Nantucket botanists. The young botanists were eager to make her acquaintance, and Maria was a one-woman repository of all the plants on Nantucket. When the botanist Bicknell published a follow-up catalog about Nantucket in the early 1900s, he continually referenced Maria's work, which explicitly documented just when and precisely where plants were introduced. For instance, when Maria wrote about chicory, she said it was a roadside plant along the south end of Orange Street, where it had thrived for 50 years. At the age of 87, Maria was asked about one of the plants in her flora, Tilia. The plant was hard to find, and botanists were curious about a location for it on Nantucket Island. Maria wrote, "My patch of Tilia doubtless still exists, and there is a happy day in store for any botanist who sees it at just the right season." Maria died in 1907. She had moved back to Nantucket to live with her daughter. Walter Dean wrote in his Rhodora biography of Maria that she died on a bright morning with the room flooded with sunshine, which she always loved, and filled with iris, columbine, and cornflowers. He wrote, "She lived true to the Latin motto of her mother's family, post tenebris speramus lumen de lumine," which Maria always loved to translate, "After the darkness, we hope for light from the source of light." Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up, and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.